Welcome back to the Banking on Data podcast, powered by Lumio Solutions, where we invite experts from across the community banking and credit union industry to share best practices for enabling risk-informed business intelligence. Hello, I am excited to welcome Beth Nilles back to the podcast series, the first in our Banking on Data season, though, that Beth has joined us for. So Beth, welcome back to the program, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ed. Happy to be here.
Beth, you spent large portions of your career in operations roles at banks, right, where you've seen risk and controls activities firsthand. These days, you spend more of your time helping banks apply some structure to their risk and controls initiatives, in particular using self-assessment diagnostics, frameworks, tools. And in recent years, right, you've spent a chunk of time in areas like BSA and fraud and cybersecurity, but more recently, you've been leaning into artificial intelligence and the risks and controls around AI. So AI is the topic I'd like for us to explore today, and specifically how to embark on this AI journey responsibly. So a financial institution is ultimately enacting risk-informed actions and decisions are in this area of an AI. So we're going to break down the huge topic of AI into hopefully consumable and actionable chunks here today. So let's start with a community bank or credit union that hasn't really engaged in AI yet, or is in the early stages of dabbling in something like ChatGPT or chatbots. Give us some thoughts on what's the very first step in building a responsible approach to artificial intelligence?
It's an excellent question, and it is a big, broad subject. I actually think of it as twofold. First is you need to educate a small team in your organization about artificial intelligence. And you need to not only look at the opportunities because they are very plentiful, but you also need to examine some of the risks. And then, so that's step 1A. And 1B would be then do a risk assessment and take what you've just learned and apply it to a single instance of a single use case, so to speak. And that'll get your, let's call it an AI team, involved, because AI is not just IT. It's not even remotely just IT. So that's the way I would do it. Pick a narrow use case with clear benefits, perhaps start in an operational setting, not a customer-facing setting, do a
Right.
assessment, and then start to build a feedback loop about it. And that would be step 1.
All right. A few different themes there, right? You boiled that down to something that's very digestible, but there was a lot in there. I think that so let me just pick up on a few points. Small team, right? You can think of AI as boiling the ocean, right? An enormous journey to embark upon. But one, starting small. And I think we've talked to Jeff Fink on the topic of data management, and he says a similar thing of start small, right? Get yourself out of the starting gate. But I think that the other kind of the next step there of then risk assessing that is really key. And so you don't get too far down the path of this journey without taking a step and saying, right, what are the opportunities, but what are the risks? And then making sure that you're comfortable with those risks, right? I think I used the term earlier of risk-informed activities and actions and decisions. And so bringing that risk layer into AI here seems key. And then your last point there of operational versus customer, or internal versus external, I think that probably ties into that risk assessment piece as well, right? The riskiness of doing something internally versus externally is quite different.
Yeah, and then you learn about it without risking anything, no client data, no reputational risk. And then you can learn and get benefits in your organization to really help you achieve what you're trying to do.
I think we've also seen that if you get if you keep it narrow and you do this response, engage in this responsibly, um, you then also have some trailblazers, if you will, that become the champions and the leaders and the folks that will be the advocates. And they've done it in the right way, and they model the behavior that others can then replicate.
Yeah, and all banking is a risk, right? I mean, we've talked about that a lot, you and I.
Right.
And if you go into it with your eyes open and you understand what you're entering into, you can really leverage that and go far and go faster than a lot of other people.
All right. I want to come back to this concept that you can then take a starting point and extend into many other parts of the organization. So, right, you've worn operations, lending, right, in a number of different hats there. But AI can touch not just technology or risk, but also, right, compliance and operations and lending and branches and really the whole enterprise.
Yeah.
So, given that wide reach, who should be accountable to making sure that AI is deployed responsibly?
You know, I said it earlier, when I first thought of AI, I was like, oh, that would be an IT issue. It's really not. It is a global or an enterprise-wide ownership responsibility. And it should start at the top. The board, the C-suite should set the appetite and the tone for use and how risk forward or risk averse they are. And it should start there, and it kind of goes in layers, right? So the board and the C-suite own it, that they're responsible. Then there's guardians, right? Risk and compliance, they're the ones that are going to set guardrails and say, okay, yep, you guys, this is our appetite. So we're going to say, don't go beyond this, don't use it for that, do go use it for this, don't use it for that. And then you align all that through, honestly, a risk and control self-assessment. You identify the risks, you figure out what the controls are, and then you identify a very specific owner. And that's not by department, that's by human. So it would be Ed owns or Beth owns, not, operations or IT or something. It is an individual that can be held responsible. And then you kind of have to just do it like you do anything else. You map out the risks, you agree to the controls, sit down in a room, have a roundtable discussion about it, write down who owns what, and then start that feedback loop, monitor it, and keep it going. And before you know it, your whole institution will have AI successfully working for you.
The 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 question then of having or of getting to that point of having the whole institution having AI work for it. If we go back to this question of accountability for making sure it's deployed responsibly, right? You started with the board, the C-suite, the leadership team, and then having guardrails in place. And I want to come back to the guardrails and the frameworks in a second. But you've got risk teams, we've got this risk layer, and then you've got business teams that are going to be using the AI tools, if you will, on a daily or an operational basis. What should that interplay be between the risk team and the business team? What kind of interaction should occur there?
I think it needs to be more frequent than annual to start. I think
Hmm.
that there needs to be constant check-in initially to make sure that, depending on your use case, right? You want to make sure that because AI is smart, but it isn't perfect, right? It can be wrong. It can do things like drift. It can make things up. You can have bias, unintended consequences. You need to have more frequent check-ins than you would for, say, some other process that is less flexible or less likely to change. So you risk is not they're not the ones monitoring, that's your first line. Your first line needs to monitor, but your risk team and your compliance team, they need to do uh, mini audits. They need to be involved, engaged. It needs to be a conversation.
I think that's a really interesting point, that to the contrast between even some of these other themes I mentioned earlier, right, where you've spent some time, whether it's BSA or fraud or cyber, right, in more, recent years, right, emerging risk areas, but none of them really emerged at the pace with which AI is emerging.
That's true.
And so this whole concept of frequent interaction, and certainly in the world that you live in, of risks and controls, the concept of, right, well, there's an annual checkpoint. AI is just moving too quickly for that.
I think so.
And so having more frequent interaction there, more frequent check-ins, the continuous feedback loop, I think is really a key different dimension, if you will, from with the emergence of this area of exposure.
I would actually think of this along the lines of cyber risk and fraud risk. This is something that needs to have eyes on it. It's not a set it and forget it type of event. So,
All right. Let's then go to the guardrails and the frameworks topic. What are the principles, if you will, that you're trying to achieve by having guardrails and frameworks in place?
so the first obviously is you want to be, well, it's another twofold thing, Ed. You want to be safe, right? You don't want to be irresponsible with the use of any of this stuff, but you also want to be compliant, and you want to use it to the fullest extent. So the guides that are out there, and they all have all the regulators have them, the OCC, the FDIC, the Fed. They have a framework that they recommend, and this goes all the way back to model risk, right? This is how you should think of AI. Think of it not as just a vendor, but as a model risk vendor.
Hmm.
And if you use those, I like the OCC guidance because while it's done for big banks, I think it's written very well and it can be used by all banks. And then smaller banks don't have to go to some of the full extent that the OCC guidance has. But if you take the NIST AI risk maturity framework and you layer that in, specifically things about bias and fairness and transparency and explainability, then you are a long way down the road to making sure that you're using AI responsibly for you and your customers.
All right. There are thoughtful frameworks out there, right? You mentioned a couple, right? OCC guidance, right? The NIST, the NIST 2.0 framework that has recently come out, that people can start with. So they should feel that they are not starting from scratch. They don't have to figure this out themselves, right? Which I think another part of this, right? It's daunting, can be daunting to begin with, but then saying, here's a blank sheet of paper, figure out your risk, your approach and your risk strategy here. That makes something that was daunting and makes it really daunting.
Very much so. And it's not, it is, you aren't starting from scratch. You already have a lot of this already in place, believe it or not. It's just looking at it through a different lens, maybe, or a little different slant. So it's not reinventing the wheel. You're really just focusing on fairness, accountability, transparency, and monitoring. That's what you're focusing on. And all of that is spelled out in these frameworks. They can make it a little complex and complicated. You don't need to. You just don't reinvent the wheel.
That also then gives you a construct for interaction with regulators, with the board, right? As you mentioned before, getting your programs and your risks and controls into a I'll say a methodology that then can be consumed to report back up. So you've started, right? If we go back to starting at the top, and that's where the appetite is set, and that's where the guidance originates from. But then being able to go back and report back up from the first line and the second line up to the third line, up to the board. This gives you a framework in which to communicate back up there as well.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned this is at the top. It seems common sense to me, but I'm going to say it overtly. Write yourself a 1 or 2 page policy that says, this is what we're doing. This is what we will not do. This is what our appetite is. Just lay it out up front. When you go to the board, you get your risk appetite, write your policy, do your education, pick your pilot, and build it into the framework, and update your vendor policies to include. Don't rewrite it. Don't do something separate for AI. Embed it in the existing stuff you already have, because that's all it is. It's an extra tool in your tool belt. It's not a brand new thing.
Right.
It's
Right.
been around forever, and people have been using it forever without really thinking about the fact that they're using it.
Right. So get the risk appetite, write your couple page policy, get to the board to, align on appetite, freshen up the vendor policy, start small,
Start small.
do your risk assessment of that, and then that'll inform the guideposts, the guardrails that you want to put in place for the second, the third, the fourth use cases, and then use one of these frameworks then to be able to capture the activity and report back up, to be able to report to regulators, be able to report to your board, be able to report to your internal stakeholders as to what the risks are, and then what the controls are that you have around that. And that is, I think, to bring it back to kind of the opening comment about where you spend your time with risk and control self-assessments, right? That ultimately gives you the ability, as you said, to have the more frequent interaction. You've got a framework there that you can use to go and have those conversations with the business teams. What are you doing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? Right? What are the risks that you're encountering? And you can capture that through something like a risk and control self-assessment.
Absolutely. And don't do it in a silo. Get all your business units involved at some point and start educating your team, because they need to be able to explain it to the clients eventually.
Yeah, and maybe that's where we close here, right? That was the first line or phrase you used was educating a small team. And so I think that perhaps is the closing message here is education is key, right? If we're trying to get to this space or this world of risk-informed actions and risk-informed decisions, right? That all begins with education.
Absolutely.
Beth, thank you very much. Appreciate your thoughts and perspective here. I know you are living in this world right now, so certainly anyone who is listening today that would like to discuss risk and controls and risk and control self-assessments in the AI space, I'd encourage them to reach out to you for any follow-up discussion as well.
Oh, and can I plug that we have a program risk assessment coming out for this as well?
Maybe that is a teaser for a follow-up conversation. So we'll use that to get you back on here and explore that in a little bit more detail. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Ed.
it.